It is, every time I work with a cardiology practice and I talk to their billing and front office, they moan and groan for the most part because these guys go to the hospital because they're doing rounding. They've done a bypass, they've done some other angioplasty, some sort of surgical procedure, and they're going to visit that patient for a day or 2 days or 3 days until they are discharged. And every time they go and visit that patient, that is a billable episode that needs to be billed through the physician's office as well as through the hospital. But it's a separate charge for the physician's time. Invariably, these guys come back with their white coats, the badge of being a doctor, those white hospital coats, and they pull out of their pockets little scraps of paper. And some of these scraps of paper can be 2 weeks old, and I saw this person, and they may not have gotten the name just right, and they might not have put the date on the little scrap of paper. And so you've got a billing office that is tearing their hair out trying to figure out what to bill for which patient, why, and what to capture, and it makes them absolutely nuts. If you are a rounding surgeon like one of these, you want an EHR product, or your billing office is going to pound you to buy an EHR product that allows you to interface from a PDA or a smartphone, an Android, or an iPhone. That way you can log into the software real time, record that you've seen this patient, and it goes through like it's almost transparent to the billing office. And the headaches for the billing folks, well, the rounding headaches pretty much go away. So that becomes very, very important. But also, if you are in one of these surgical specialties, a big consideration is going to be, can your EHR interface with the hospital's data? How difficult is it going to be to exchange some level of data from point A to point B? Although rounding is a lot more important. These surgeons, hand, orthopedic, plastic, and vascular, do some of both. They do some operating in ambulatory surgical centers or in operating suites within their offices, and some on an inpatient basis. It just sort of depends on the severity of the issue they're dealing with. Vascular surgeons, if they're doing something really serious, they'll operate in an OR. But if they're dealing with varicose veins and spider veins and so forth, those will be in-office or ambulatory surgical procedures. Plastic surgeons sometimes have their own operating suites in their offices, and sometimes, depending on whether they're focused more on the cosmetic and aesthetic plastic surgery versus reconstructive surgery, that will determine whether they're operating more so in ambulatory surgical centers. If they're doing reconstruction, most of what they'll do will be in a third-party surgical center or in the hospital. If they're doing nip and tuck kind of work, they may have their own surgical suite to do that. Same with hand surgeries. Hand surgery is becoming more and more endoscopic and less invasive, as is orthopedic surgery. And large orthopod practices typically will have a surgical suite where they do the vast majority of their endoscopic surgeries. But when they get into joint replacements and so forth, and heavy-duty reconstruction of seriously fractured bones, they go to the hospital for that. Here are our other specialties other than surgeons. And, you know, there are subspecialty after subspecialty after subspecialty. You can add pediatric in front of any of these specialty names and have another subspecialty that needs both some of the pediatric features of the software as well as the specialty features of the software. But for the most part, these are the ones that you will encounter and that you need to give a little thought to, because you want to be able to speak the language of this specialty. They all have their own language. When you get to be a specialist, the number of procedure codes and billing codes, diagnosis codes that you're actually using can go from 100 to, I know some specialties that basically bill 3 to 5 codes, and that's it, because that's all they see. You get into an orthopedic practice, and you get, once upon a time, I work with an orthopedic guy in Tampa. Once upon a time, he did just about anything sports related. Now, all he does is knees, and he does endoscopies, and all he does is MCL, ACL, ACL. That's it. That's all he fixes, and if you need anything else, there's somebody else in his practice that does that. So allergy immunology, those are the guys that are focused on figuring out what makes us sneeze and helping us. Cardiology, you know, dermatology, dentists, endocrinology, who typically see patients that have chronic conditions having to do with either diabetes, some sort of thyroid disorder, a variety of thyroid disorders, sometimes rheumatoid arthritis, because there's a connection between all of these endocrine diseases. And they may also see patients with like lupus and those kinds of issues. GIs, they have a hefty need to interface with imaging devices and software as well. Hematologists, infectious disease specialists, they need systems that can easily be sanitized, which is not the iPad yet, but eventually, because every one of my doctors wants an iPad. Nephrology, neurology, oncology, ophthalmology and optometry, which have very specific needs around refraction and vision correction, orthopedics, otolaryngology, pain management, podiatry, pulmonary diseases, psychiatry, rheumatology, and urology. And you probably already know that with psychiatry and mental health software, that is a very different animal, plus you're looking at a whole different level of HIPAA requirements and security and privacy requirements. So what gets really interesting is when you start working with a multi-specialty practice, a larger multi-specialty practice, and they want one software package, but it needs to meet a variety of different specialty needs. You will get significant support from your software vendor that you choose to partner with in terms of understanding the benefits and features and functionality for each of these specialties. But you need to be aware, PQRI is a program through Medicare, which is Physician Quality Research Initiative, which looks at specific outcome-based measures as a means of trying to improve medical outcomes. That is a program like e-prescribing that offers an incentive payment, so that if you submit this information to CMS, the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, you submit that data and you meet the quality requirements showing that you're doing the right things and you're achieving the appropriate outcomes, then you can receive a small incentive payment. It's a couple of percent, 2 to 3%. You need to be familiar with what those measures are for the specialties that you're dealing with, which is why some resellers and other consulting practices like ours sometimes don't try to work with the vast majority. They try to focus in on a couple of specific specialties where they can become deep experts as opposed to having broad knowledge. Board certification organizations can be very, very helpful to you as well. If you choose to go down a path with specific specialties, it's a really good idea to develop a relationship with that organization. One of the things I was talking to someone about last night was some of the events that I do where I go out and talk about the HITECH Act and getting the stimulus payments. Sometimes I can get those certified for continuing medical education credits, CMEs, and if not that, CEUs. That is a great thing to do because they'll come out of the woodwork to see you because they are always trying and under pressure to receive their CMEs to keep their licensure current. And then I think it's really important, if you choose a vendor or a couple of vendors that you're working with, you need to become as conversant with the competitor software as you are with your own, because that's the only way you're going to be able to close the deal in many cases. A lot of folks who started out in healthcare IT started out around the billing function because billing has been a nightmare for small practices for forever. Dealing with a variety of insurance companies, and then 10, 15 years ago, the insurance companies all got multiple clearinghouses, so that became another level of interface for the physician's practice. So there are many products that started out as billing software that automated the collection of the data that needed to be submitted to process a claim, and then the natural outgrowth from that was, well, now that we've got the billing piece of the software, let's tie it to the appointment piece of the software where we can capture the patient's insurance information, and we've got all the information about what day they were seen and how long the encounter lasted and so forth. And so now what we're seeing is many of those companies have expanded out into clinical information systems in order to develop a full-blown EHR. A good example of this is Athena Health. They started out as a billing software company, and now they are a full-bore, have a full-bore EHR offering. But you need to understand sort of the basic workflow and pieces of the revenue cycle management side of the practice in order to effectively sell to a physician or to their practice manager. This is where a lot of pain exists in the practice typically. So the basic stages are eligibility, copay, coding, bill submission, then tracking and posting what happens to that bill, managing the receivables that are left on the books, and reporting on that. Eligibility usually has to do with making sure that the patient is covered, that their insurance is in force and active. It may have to do with timing. There are certain, you need to verify, for example, an OBGYN office, if the doctor orders a mammogram, they need to make sure that it's been at least 12 months or 11 months because the insurance may not pay for that procedure unless a certain amount of time has passed, unless there is an indication that there is a need for that diagnosis or that diagnostic imaging procedure because of the presentation of a symptom or other issue. The kinds of procedures that will be approved, some procedures are approved easily, others are not. Some plans, for example, will easily approve breast reduction surgery for a woman. Others, not so much. You have to document some specific symptoms and a case that says this is why this procedure is medically necessary for this individual. Some referrals, you have to check eligibility. You need to make sure that that specialist or the place you're referring them to is covered or participates in that plan. Surgery certainly needs to be pre-approved by the insurance company. And then referrals into rehab or psychological family counseling typically also require eligibility checks. There are a number of ways to do this. You can do it at the point in time the patient walks in, presents their insurance card. The way it used to be done for 100 years was the insurance card comes in, they Xerox it, and then the front desk person calls and makes sure this person is still under this particular policy. Or at least that's a better practice than waiting to submit the claim and finding out they're not eligible anymore. Typically, the next thing that happens is the copay, and most all of us have a copay nowadays. Sometimes it's a deductible, but more often than not, there's a copay. It can be collected up front or at exit. I think it's better to get it up front because there may be an additional balance that you become aware of that can be collected as they are checking out. But I think it's best typically to collect the copay when the patient comes and checks in. And then when you check the copay, this is also a great time where you want to be able to see if there is an outstanding balance on the patient's account so the clerk can ask, I notice you have a balance. Would you like to take care of that today? Can I use this credit card to clear out your balance? Would you like to establish a payment plan? Then I can use this credit card. And this is where we're starting to see kiosks in doctors' offices and large clinics where you can check in, you can update your medical history information, sign off on the HIPAA forms, slide your credit card, and the kiosk will automatically come back and ask you all those questions and say, if there is a balance left over after we submit your claim to insurance, will you authorize us to charge it against this credit card? This is a huge boom for small practices. And then, any accounting issues, questions that the patient may have about their account and so forth. The next thing that happens is the physician, the clinician, sees the patient and typically goes through a process. Many physicians use a process called SOAP. It's documented in the handout that you received, which has to do with documenting the subjective symptoms that the patient is experiencing, then the objective examination, the assessment, which is the diagnosis, and then the plan, which is what we're going to do to address this particular condition or disease state. The key part of what happens here is getting the right coding. There are a variety of different taxonomies for diagnosis codes, ICD-9, which is becoming ICD-10 in 2013. Another reason you want to develop a relationship with your doctor clients today because they're going to be facing this taxonomy change in 2013. You want to be their trusted advisor for that. SNOMED is a different set of diagnosis codes, and DSM-4 is mental health diagnosis. And then there are procedure codes, CPT codes, E&M codes, which stands for evaluation and